Hi everyone, it's GigaBeef here, and today we're going to be taking another look at the SVD. The latest rebalancing of attachments changed a lot about this weapon, especially on ergonomics that you can achieve, so stick around and let's get going. Alright, so let's start with the most important part, which is the builds. The SVD has high recoil due to firing one of the highest energy rounds in the game, which is the 7.62 54R round, which is shared by the Mosin and the SV98 bolt actions, but this is mitigated a decent amount by being semi-auto. If we mess around with the builds, the lowest recoil that you can get to is 119, which we'll take a look at a bit later, but what this means is because we can't get the recoil to anything sensible, we should just focus on ergonomics to try to get the ADS speed up and the stamina drain as low as possible. For the builds, I'm going to split these into budget and meta, well, as meta as the SVD can be, as well as long range and short range. This is because the SVD can fulfill both roles in theory, and although there are usually better choices for short range builds and typically it's run as a sniper/DMR type role, certain quests like Punisher Part 6 require the use of the SVD, which makes running these close combat much more popular than you might otherwise think. So the first build, cheap and long range, basically takes the SVD at stock and adds a PSO scope to the side. SVDs are 95,000 from Prepor 3, but right now we're about 90k on the flea market, which is a small discount to the trader price. This is fairly expensive, but for a basic build, the SVD has a dovetail rail, which allows for attaching the PSO series of scopes, which can be found for as low as 10 to 11k, which makes the entire thing just over 100,000, outside of mags and rounds. At stock, with the PSO, the SVD does actually work fairly effectively, mostly due to the great rounds that it uses, but you have to be careful not to get engaged in CQB, as it can be hard to point shoot it effectively. Spam fire with the high recoil makes this quite difficult to land sometimes, and beats someone who's got a full auto rifle or SMG. If you want to use a different scope, there are a few mounts that you can add to the stock SVD, which gives you a rail on which to attach other optics. The cheap ones tend to have a lot of height over bore, sitting high over the weapon, which makes taking accurate shots harder, especially at close range, and possibly blocking more of your screen when not aiming as well. These are the Pillad from Jaeger 2 with -2 ergo, and the Axion Cobra from Jaeger 1 with -1 ergo. One point to note on these is that the Cobra allows you to add a laser or a flashlight on the side, which is useful to bear in mind as this can help you defend yourself in close combat for the price of the rail and maybe an NC Star Blue laser which can be found on Skier 1 for 5,700 rubles, and can be worth it if you like these lasers for point firing on other weapons. The two B13 rails from Skier 2 are both decent with average eye relief with -1 ergo and are about 9,000 each. The two low rails are the CAA from Mechanic 2 with -2 ergo at 7,000 and the SVD low mount from Mechanic 3 with -1 ergo at 10,000. You can choose one of these and buy whatever scope you want. A nice budget choice is often the Elcan as they are fairly cheap and have both 1x and 4x modes. A point to note, remember that you cannot fold the SVD with most of the side mounted scopes or rails attached, and you have to take these off before the stock can be folded down again. Now let's move on to budget short range builds. Here we're going to change up the handguard, which can be done in the other build too if you want, but in close combat, ergo becomes way more important due to the change in ADS speed, and we can get some ergo fairly cheaply this way. Outside of the default handguard, there are two to choose from, one which is the modern handguard for the SVD, which is 15,500 rubles from Prepor 3, which gives one more ergonomics at 7 than the original handguard, and a 4% recoil reduction. This also needs an M-lock to attach any foregrip other than the AFG M-lock grip itself. The other choice is the XRS DRG, which is 11,000 from Mechanic 2, which only gives -1% reduction versus the default. If we're going pure budget, we don't really care about the 3% recoil difference and 1 ergonomics, and just use the XRS because it's 5,000 rubles cheaper. This handguard also takes foregrips natively, as it has Picatinny rails directly on it. Choosing a foregrip is quite different for the SVD in my opinion versus a lot of other weapons, as you can just sack off the recoil completely. When running budget, I tend to use the KAC vertical from Peacekeeper 1 at $31, which is around 3,500 rubles. The best ergo grips in the game give 9 ergo, and this gives 7 but is super cheap because it has no recoil benefit, and for the SVD we don't really care. Then we can use the fact that the SVD is built similarly to AKs in that it takes the TTO1 attachment, which allows you to use a fairly wide range of red dots and holographics straight onto this small rail which attaches in place of the rear sight. We can also upgrade the pistol grip if we want to, and my choice on bang for buck would usually be the Tapco Saw pistol grip from Peacekeeper 2 for $43 or about 5,000 rubles, which gives 11 ergo versus the 5 of the base grip. Finally, you can add a flashlight or a laser as you wish. I prefer mine going underneath as the laser is then in line with the barrel and doesn't get in the way like it can do on the left hand side. I usually pick the NC Star as it's the cheapest. If we add all of these elements, this gets you to 42 ergo and 184 recoil for around 135,000 rubles, compared to a 30 ergo and 187 recoil of the stock version. This might not seem much, but we've only added 20,000 of actual attachments, and for this we get around 4 frames increased ADS speed when we compare the two. This is also the one that I use to complete Punisher Part 6. Next up is the meta long range build, and for this we're likely to want to use the suppressor. There is only one muzzle attachment for the SVD in Tarkov, which is the default compensator that comes with it already, then the rotor 43 thread adapter from Mechanic, and finally the rotor suppressor itself. These are expensive on Skier at 50,000 rubles, but fairly cheap on the Flea at around 30,000, because now they remove 18 ergonomics, so they've fallen out of favour a bit with the player base, but they do reduce recoil by 10% as well, which is a decent amount. There are two ways that you can build up the SVD to its highest stats, one using the lower band and one using the free float chassis, which dictates which cover you have to use as they aren't interchangeable. The lowest recoil that you can get is 119, as I mentioned earlier, using the lower band version, with the modern handguard and the modern rail from Prapor 3 and 4 for 15 and 10,000 respectively, the RK2 foregrip from Skier 4 at 26,000, and the US Palm AK pistol grip from Peacekeeper 3 at $71. However, this takes your ergo all the way down to 12, and that's before you've even added a scope, and costs roughly 200,000. Personally, I think the better way to go is the free float chassis route, which takes the chassis from Mechanic 3 for 18,000 and the custom cover for 2k also from Mechanic 3. Comparing these two builds with the same min recoil attachments gets you to 18 ergo and 129 recoil, so 6 ergonomics better. Switching out the vertical foregrip for the best in slot, which is the Fortis Shift, takes you to 31 ergo, which is a bit better than the other version. This weapon is also around 200,000 to make. With both of these variants, it's also possible to mount a canted NC style backup mount from Peacekeeper 2 for $70 if you like running a red dot alongside your main scope. Finally on the builds, if you're running a short range version and you want to spend a bit extra on it and you want the highest ergo possible, removing the suppressor bumps you back up to 50 ergo on this build with a 20 round mag, which is starting to get alright. Given you're looking to be close up to your opponent, it doesn't really matter if you have the suppressor or not, and we'd likely rather forgo the 10% recoil reduction to make the weapon better to handle on the ergonomics. When we look at the difference between 31 and 50 ergo with the same gun, i.e. the suppressor and no suppressor, we're talking around 6 frames of ADS speed measured when the reticle lands on the target dummy in the range. I record at 60 FPS, which means each frame is 16.7 milliseconds, which equates to about 100 millisecond difference, which can make the difference between life and death. One other thing that I did note while I was testing this that is interesting is that heavy weapons with low ergo start to get this sway on the ADS, which you can see happening on the 31 ergonomics version. The reticle overshoots and then comes back again, which doesn't happen on the 50 ergo build. Right, next up onto ammo. T46 and LPS are practically the same, with T46 being a tracer. These are actually okay with the SVD, as the ability to use semi-auto to take follow-up shots combined with the high flesh damage, decent pen and high armor damage means that it will shred through most armor fairly effectively. LPS is purchasable at Prapor 1 and T46 at Prapor 2, but these are usually cheaper on the flea market. Next you have 7N1, which is renowned for its high damage and one of the few rounds left in the game that can one-shot to the thorax. This one can be bought from Prapor 3 at 805 rubles, but note that with the armor damage reduction that happens irrespective of penetration or not in Tarkov, this can make it not kill in one hit if they're wearing level 4+, even if you penetrate. As the thorax HP was increased from 80 to 85, even a small amount of damage mitigation means that it won't one-shot anymore, given that it does 86 damage specifically. However, it's still nice to be able to one-shot scavs, hatchling and other low armor players. Using the stats in Veritas' Battle Buddy, 7N1 has a 38% chance to pen a fresh level 5 on the first shot, and a 95% chance to pen level 4. This increases dramatically on the level 5 once damaged, so follow-up shots are very powerful even against well-armoured targets. 7BT1 and SMB are kinda like the high-level equivalent of T46 and LPS, with 7BT1 being a tracer, but otherwise their stats are very similar with 78 and 75 damage, and 59 and 62 pen. SMB is a 92% chance to pen level 6 in one shot, so effectively negates pretty much every piece of armor in the game, giving a near guaranteed 2-shot kill to the thorax, which is pretty neat. These are both level 4 Prapor purchases, with SNB about 800 per round and 7BT just over 1000, but SNB is normally cheaper on the fleet at about 600 to 700. Personally, I think running the SVD with SNB is a great choice, given this is typically cheaper on the market than 7N1, and guaranteed 2-shot kills to the thorax is amazing. Touching on magazines briefly, the SVD only has 2, which are the 10 rounders and the 20 rounders. The 10s are on Prapor 3 for 4,000 and the 20s are on Prapor 4 for 10,000. However, they are usually around the same price on the flea, with the 10s about 5 to 6k and the 20s around 16k. If you can buy them relatively cheaply, 20 rounders are pretty much a no-brainer as they only give you one more ergo penalty than the 10s. My favourite build is the budget close range one, especially for use on quests like Punisher Part 6, where in factory it feels quite similar to using AP-20 slugs in a Saga 12, except with much better penetration. Point fire with a laser is fairly strong, but sometimes spam firing can lead you to overshoot and die. The SVD is not a meta weapon, as there are better alternatives strictly speaking, but I have fun running it and it's one of the few weapons that you can run early with relatively cheap rounds off the fleet that can kill literally any player you face if you get your shots off. So if you learned something or enjoyed today's video and want to support the channel, please consider dropping a like and a sub as it helps with visibility for those who haven't found me yet on YouTube. To see when I'm streaming, you can follow me on Twitter and Twitch, where I'm currently live twice a week, once on Friday at 9 PM UK time for the Scav Talk podcast, which you can check out in the link in the description below, and a regular Tarkov stream on Saturday at 2 PM UK time. And with all that said, I'll see you next time, and as always, have fun in your raids.